today, the topic specifically is the message in your pain, the message in your pain. Welcome, Jeff. And for those that haven't heard me speak, I am very passionate about helping people find the message in their pain and use it to actually grow to become stronger. And I want to kick it off with just a quote. Welcome, Erica. Welcome, Erica. And I just shared for those that are joining that we recently updated the app. So please, after this, if you haven't yet done so, just update the app. If you're Android, just know that the biggest update is that you can use your Bluetooth. So I'm excited about that. And also for those that are iPhone users, you will be able to also have calendar view for the aspect for the rooms. So that's a cool feature as well. So they gave something for each of us. So the best of both worlds. But here's a quote by Khalil Gibran. It says, the quote says, "Pain is not the enemy. It is the messenger." I'm going to repeat that again. Pain is not the enemy. It is the messenger. So the goals of this masterclass today, the goals are to explore the different ways that pain can actually be a catalyst for change, right? Share some personal stories. So we'll be wrapping up in our about 10 to 15 minutes early so that way we can hear from each other, so that we can hear how pain has shaped people's lives, including yours, and also help you to find your purpose. And then also I want to offer some tips, but I want us to share together as a group, because I don't believe there's a such thing as an expert in this space, but there is a opportunity to share your lived experience, right? And how you found your message in your pain. And then also I want to just continue to create a not just a safe space, a well-being space, right? For those that don't know, I'm also a pastor, a social worker, therapist, but ultimately I'm an enthusiast for people to have spaces where they can thrive and flourish. And the word in the Bible that actually denotes this, typically we hear it as a greeting, is shalom, but shalom actually means well-being. So I want this to be your shalom space, your well-being space, right? And so what I also hope you get out of this, though, at least by the end, a better understanding of how pain can be a catalyst for change, because I don't want to trivialize pain, right? Because I know there's acute and chronic pain, but also feel inspired today by other stories and who actually found the message in their pain. And so I want to, again, welcome those that just joined. And I would love to know, and just so I can make sure my app is working, let's try to chime in the chat real quick and just let me know where you're logging in from. I know Rachel's actually, so I know Erica's as well. And then afterwards, I'll use that to make sure that I can see the chat. If I can see the chat, we'll do the icebreaker. So our agenda for today, we'll actually go through an icebreaker. And then afterwards, I'll introduce a little bit more about our topic today. And then you'll hear a personal story, and hopefully I can get through it without crying. And then afterwards, we'll start to just share some space together, okay? Ooh, Erica, I wonder what the temperature is there, because I definitely resonate with the heat. Jeff, okay. LV, Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay, wow. And okay, I have, is it Kia, Maryland? Okay. Wow. We're all around the space. Okay. My name again is Denard. For those that don't know, I'm actually based in Winter Springs, Florida. Also, it's like 20 minutes from downtown Orlando, excuse me. So that's where I'm from. That's where I'm logging in from. So I can see the chat. So let me do this. Oh, 104. My goodness. Yes, Rachel, we welcome tears. Being unafraid of your own emotions is the greatest freedom. I received that. Okay. So let's get going. And we're gonna actually kick it off in the most vulnerable place, since Rachel, you talked about this. So now, don't throw stones at me. But for this icebreaker, it's actually going to kind of allow us to glean into our topic today. And I also want to mention this for those that may be new to Circles, a special welcome. I don't see anyone that I haven't seen before. Welcome, Juanita. And remember, Circles, the reason why Denard loves Circles, this is just a quick tangent, because this is also recorded and will be available on all your social media outlets, especially like your podcasters like Spotify, and also on YouTube. So I want to make sure everyone knows that Circles is actually giving us an opportunity to address what the U.S. Surgeon General calls an epidemic. and it's loneliness, right? But connecting with people in the sense of common interest and common pain, right? And so we're connected to small groups of individuals that's dealing with similar life challenges. And to date, we've actually exceeded this, by the way. Welcome, RJ. 150,000 people, right? So Circles app is an on-demand 24/7 small audio room led by moderators, peers like yourself as well, and experienced professional leading rooms such as mental health or any area in this helping field. So we have this today for our usage. There's also an opportunity for you to join through the Circles Plus, where you get these master classes as well. And for those that are listening, the recording will be available later. At the end, they'll send out more information about that. And so let me recap real quick, because I did promise Gina I was going to do this. But as I'm doing this, just place in the chat, and I'll put the prompt for the icebreaker. I'd like to ask you to share the biggest problem you're facing right now and how old you are. The biggest problem you're facing right now and how old you are, right? I'll try to place the prompt in the chat, but I want to stick to what I promised Gina. For those that are just joining, just a quick recap. We're actually going through the entire story arc of storytelling. And last week, we talked about the opening and closing image of a person's story, specifically from the film It's a Wonderful Life by George Bailey. And we were showing how he was reflecting on his life, battling suicidal ideation, taking on his family's business. And he started to realize all his pain and suffering, right, that he experienced. And actually what the opening image, he's contemplating suicide, right? So he's battling suicidal ideation. He's about to be on the bridge, but he also experienced what Clarence, the angel that has the task of making sure that he doesn't jump off the bridge, of seeing that he's made the world a better place and he's made other people better people, right? And so he started to learn in the closing image how to appreciate the good things in his life, and he found his purpose in helping others. And this is why I think it's also important to talk about pain. But I think one of the myths, which I want to kind of Mythbuster, by the way, today. And this is the linkage for us talking about the theme and the setup. And I'll tell you what that is later. But we often believe that the lesson learned or the overarching message that we learn from our pain is at the end of our journey or after I get through it. But what I've found is actually at the beginning. We just don't take enough time to reflect and feel and sense the messages that are being sent our way. So let's get back to our icebreaker, Gina. Hopefully that was a good recap for you of what we discussed. And so today we're going to talk about the theme and the setup. It actually comes after the opening image. And for our icebreaker, I'm going to read what we see in the chat. For those that are driving or at work, feel free to audibly share, and I'll give you a moment to do that after I read what's in the chat. So let me see the prompt for those that are just joining. It is, I'm asking you to share your biggest problem that you're facing right now, right currently, and how old are you? How old are you? All right. And so I'm going to read Rachel's. Let me see. No, actually, Jessica's first. Jessica's first. And grieving 3 deaths, the debilitating vicarious trauma from work. Girl, I relate. RJ, approaching 40 and still battling with being paid what I'm worth. RJ, you know I know what you're talking about, girl. So I am all for that. And I believe, and if anyone has heard me say this, I will repeat it day in and day out. You add value wherever you go. No pay grade, no pay scale, no 401k or benefit actually can ever equate to your worth, because you add value wherever you go. That's a tangent, infomercial, commercial, however much you want to pay me for it, RJ is there. Just know that that's what I preach and teach anywhere. Gina says, I'm 58 and my biggest battle is all the change that I've gone through last year and still going through, year and a half, and still going through, but God doesn't change and is constant. And that keeps me going. Gina, don't get me started. Don't get me started over here. And I love what you're saying. What I found in life is essentially there's two constants. There's change and then there's God. And actually, as we're recapping today, we talked about John Pfeiffer's revolutionary question to help us start to think about our life purpose in the form of our mission statement instead of the roles we occupy, kind of like what we saw Rodnika say, or RJ, as I would call her in the chat. It's not the work I do or the roles I have. It's what I do and why I do it that makes me who I am. So John Pfeiffer talked about in his book, to write it down, it's called Building for Tomorrow. I heard his webinar on Blinkist, and he talks about the looming question that actually gets us on the trajectory of that. It's what doesn't change when everything changes. What doesn't change when everything changes? We don't have time to kind of extrapolate all of that, but essentially, while the time he was a reporter, he didn't like his job, Gina. There was a lot of changes that were going on, kind of like what you're hearing from RJ and also Jessica. And finally, he found that he does love to tell stories, but essentially what he had to find, now he's actually the editor-in-chief at Entrepreneurship Magazine. He found that he likes to tell stories in his own voice, right? And that's his life purpose. So whether he has a job or not, whether he gets fired tomorrow, he can still tell stories in his own voice. And that's what we did that week. We tried to find ways to learn how to find our mission statement when everything changes. Oh, Jessica, I see you. Shout out to the 30s, millennials. Where do I go from here? Erica says, where do I go from here? Again, the prompt is, what is the current problem that you're facing right now? And she says, where do I go from here with my job? Stay or go, 51. And RJ, Ranika agrees with that. And Kaya says, or Kia, please correct me on the pronunciation. Grief, sudden loss of my mother. My condolences. And close friend 5 months ago, 42. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Rachel, the biggest problem I'm coping with right now is my health. I don't want to view it through the lens of a problem, though. I'm manifesting wellness. I hear the shalom. And right now, I cannot eat, and surgery is scheduled for Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm hanging in there, but altars are struggling, and the body is 37. Oh, that's deep. Okay. All right. So what we're seeing, we're actually setting the tone for today. And thank you all for sharing your challenges. And thank you for actually also being vulnerable enough to share much more in this space. But you all can see that we all have a variety of issues, right, that we're dealing with. But one thing I did notice, there's themes, right? There's transitions and change, right? I also noticed problems related to work and financing, right? We're people that are struggling with, if we're going to be honest, with bills. I know I've been in situations where I had more bills than I had money and more problems than I had bills, right? And so you're talking about lack of money, financial stability, work. And also, I also see another common theme is our problems are actually impacting our mental health, right? When you're talking about whether I stay or go, right? We have people feeling stressed. And you're not saying that directly, but I can actually sense it from how you're stating that I'm caught at a fork in the road. And finally, we have some problems that you heard from Rachel related to our physical health, right? So you all see the themes, and that can be where we're struggling with eating habits, chronic illness. But I think it's important to acknowledge right now that all these problems we're facing, it's important to remember that we're not alone, right? Because if you look back in the chat, as you shared, someone shared something similar or something you could relate to. So everyone in this audio room right now is going through something difficult. Everyone. But I want us to be encouraged as we think about the message and the pain. And I want you to think about, what can we learn from our challenges? How can it help us to grow and become stronger? Right? So I believe that our problems can be a source of growth and transformative, but I don't want to trivialize chronic pain or acute pain or chronic illness. But I want us to kind of develop the skill to find new strength and connect with our inner wisdom. So today we're going to share some stories, but I know I've done a lot of talking. I just want to take a moment and share a very personal story of my transitions. And for those that don't know, I also do premarital counseling and counseling. One thing, just an interesting fact that you will find, most people believe divorces and separation happen because of finances. It's an auxiliary and a byproduct. It is very important, but the major thing is transitions. And that was one of our themes that we talked about today in the chat. And so I would like to tell you about a transition that I went through from Michigan to Georgia, where I experienced a lot of pain, heartbreak, and suffering. But through it all, I learned that pain could be a powerful catalyst for change. Right. And for those that are listening, I'm just going to share a little bit about my story. And I want you to keep in mind that we're going to be talking about theme and setup. We're going to be talking about theme and setup. Right. And the setup of the story is at the beginning. You'll catch that. And the theme is also at the beginning. Right. So let me just share with you, again, for those that have not heard before, but I'm a pastor, social worker, evaluator, therapist, counselor, father, husband. I love basketball, track and field. So that's essentially my backstory. And we said backstories are equally important to telling your story. But I want you to hear me out. One day, while we're transitioning, RJ from Michigan, or wanting to transition from Michigan to Georgia, I'm graduating August of 2021. And I was out with my fraternity brothers in Georgia because we were visiting the state before we moved there permanently, right? We were at this sports bar. There was a playoff game on, and a man came up to me and he said, I've never met this man before. I know you're a pastor and I want to say something to you. This is exactly how he introduced himself to me, Gina. And I can still remember the moment vividly. RJ, I remember it vividly. The bar was crowded. It was noisy. The smell of smoke filled the air, and I could barely hear the man. But at the same time, I could hear him say this very clearly to me, Rachel. He was an older man than me. I could tell. His face was kind and gentle, but you can tell that he's been through life struggles, right? He looked me directly in my eye and said this one thing. I will never forget it, you all. He said, God didn't bring you this far to leave you. God didn't bring you this far to leave you. Now, I'm being honest, and I think we're family here. I didn't know what to say. Honestly, I just stared at him for a moment. And then I turned back to him and said, can we pray? But honestly, Jeff and Juanita, those words stayed with me. So eventually my wife and I, we moved to Michigan, to Georgia, and we moved on November 2021. And I remember it because we moved on November 7th, 2021, and my birthday was 2 days afterwards, right? November 9th. And upon the moving, we moved particularly because my wife said she wanted to work for the CDC. So she had an interview scheduled on the 11th of November. And we were sure she was going to get the job. You're hearing the shift, the setup that's happening, but she didn't. And we were left with more bills, like I said earlier, than money. And honestly, at that point in time, Jessica, I could actually taste defeat, the bitterness of defeat. As I learned that my wife didn't get the job she wanted, I was sad for her, but I was also still trying to figure out how we're going to make this work. And then in February, she actually got a job, I believe, afterwards on November 17th. She got a different job with the CDC, but it was contractual. And in February, my wife actually lost her job involuntarily. She faced some pregnancy discrimination, and she was actually pregnant with our second child, Zion, Legacy Fenaud, and she was devastated. I watched my wife, who's very energetic, her gifting is encouragement. I watched her become withdrawn and depressed. I'm trying to say this without crying. I remember what she said to me as she sat on the couch. We barely had furniture. I could hear the echo in the room. And she said, I didn't want to disappoint you. Looking in my eyes, her voice was soft and trembling. I honestly could see the tears, just like right now, welling up in her eyes. And I could see the pain. I honestly could see the pain. and the fear at the same time. I never knew those two things could exist in her face. And that, honestly, you all, broke my heart. I could feel the tears on her cheeks because I tried to wipe them away. But I'm going to be completely transparent. That was the first moment I felt helpless. This moment was especially difficult for me because I knew the person I love was suffering, and I couldn't do anything to take away her pain. So, and RJ, you didn't hear this story, but I'm going to tell you, at that point in time, I honestly felt like a failure. I went upstairs and I just sat down and I just felt my body plop to the ground. I didn't know how to provide for my family. But in the midst of that darkness, I found some hope. In fact, it was those small things, Rachel. I found the fact that my wife was strong enough to cry. You talk about vulnerability. You talk about the space that we need to cry. Her tears to me was a sign that she still cared. She cared enough to keep fighting, right? Although she was withdrawn and depressed, she was still fighting in her own way. And I knew once I saw that, Jessica, that we was going to get through this together as long as we never gave up on each other. So the next day, I felt a little better. I still had a lot of challenges ahead of me. I had to go up to Michigan, get the car that I had and sell it to keep us afloat. And we're wrapping up here because I don't want to take too much time telling my story. And I'm an OG. I'm not going to cry too much, Rachel. But at that point in time, I knew we weren't alone. I also knew that God was with me because I want you all to catch this. The words that the man said to me back then before we were going to go through all that, that's when it resonated and rung in my ears the most. I never saw him again, to be honest. I never saw him again. But his words never left me. They've given me hope in my darkest times. And I can tell you, when those words came at the moment when I plopped on the ground and the next day I had all these challenges, that was the first time. And I'm telling you, I've done Bible studies. I've had praise teams. I've done week-long evangelistic crusades. But that was the first time I actually felt the warmth of God's love like cradle me. And I clung to his promises during those difficult times. They reminded me that God is always with me no matter what. But I'm grateful for that wisdom because in that moment, Erica, I was expecting the message to come at the end of it. So I can say, oh, hindsight's 2020 and all this stuff and reflect backwards. But that reference point of those words, I didn't know I needed it when I received it, but it was very clear to me that that message came in the beginning so that I can make it through my pain, right? So now that you all have heard me talk and cry of how the power of pain shaped my life and helped me find my purpose, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that because I'm sharing my story, I want you all to consider this fact as we're about to start to share a little bit. 1 in 5 adults experience chronic pain, right? And I'm also trauma and resiliency informed. The chronic pain means that pain lasts more than 12 weeks, if we're going to give a definition, right? So chronic pain has significant impact on people's lives. We're not just talking about bills. We're not just talking about problems. We're talking about a coupling with chronic pain. And remember, I've given a definition in this space. Trauma in its simplest form is when you experience too much too fast or too little for too long, right? However, while chronic pain is significant and it can impact our lives, I also want you to understand that if I'm saying it's 1 in 5, the fact is that chronic pain is a common experience, but it's debilitating, right? So it makes it difficult to find the message in the pain, especially when it's chronic. But I'm also here to tell you that our pain is not meaningless. That's why I believe we can find meaning in it, right? It's the catalyst for change. It's the catalyst for us to grow and become stronger, right? So the theme of that, what I just shared to you all, is that God is always with you, right? So the theme is the underlining message that conveys to you that hope, that transformative hope, that pain. God is always with me and he never left me, right? But that came in the very beginning. And then the setup is the foundation of the story, where you hear the characters, you hear the setting, then you also hear the conflict, right? So you heard the characters of the man I never knew existed ends up changing my entire life, right? God, the heaven sent man, right? You hear my wife, you hear about me, you hear about our children, you hear the transition from Michigan to Georgia, and then you hear the conflict, right? Where I cannot help my wife and I still need to help my family, right? So I do want to open up the floor so we can all talk or audio room and chat with each other a little bit, because I want us to learn from each other, right? The question I have for you all, actually, it looks like there's a hand. So let me go to the hand first, because I want to follow the direction in the room. And then if we need to go the direction of the questions, we'll go that direction. But go ahead, Erica, what are your thoughts?
Denard, I can wait till you ask the question. I can wait.
Oh no, Erica, you know this your space, girl. Let's go. I like to follow where y'all leading. Go ahead.
Well, I just thank you for sharing that, your journey. And as you were sharing it, I could see myself in different parts of it, and I could see my grandmother in it. With that man that you shared, is my grandmother growing up, where she would, at different times say, "Baby, you just got to believe and trust in God." So as you were sharing that story, that reminder came up to me, and then I can relate to your wife, because when I say on my job, should I stay or I go, and then just the experience she had, I could so relate to that. And then when you say you were just there looking at her cry, but you didn't know, like, you couldn't help her. So in this situation, I'm like, it's me. I don't even know what to do. God, all I have is you, because I don't know how to help myself in this moment. And so I appreciate you sharing that story and share this right now. And every time I come in your room, I'm like, before I know it, I'm crying. And I mean, that's a good thing, but I'm like, man, I didn't even realize I needed this. So thank you for sharing too.
Erica, praise God for you. There was so much you said here, right? And I want you to recognize what you even said as far as the message in your pain, right? If I can repeat it, because I want to honor what you shared, because you just gave me a gift, right? You said your grandmother's words was, it's three things. I'm actually going to put this in the chat. Trusting God, right? Those three words, and it's the dignified simplicity of them, right? We don't know how, and I love the fact that as I was sharing, you were reflecting. So watch that. As I was sharing, you're reflecting, right, on your grandmother, right? And you're not sure during that time what it means, but you're also relating to my wife who's struggling and she's feeling helpless, right? So what we're noticing is you're finding not just message in your pain, but you're finding message in the pain of my wife, right? And it's a message that's also telling you not just trusting God, but when you're feeling lost and alone, that you're not alone, because you're able to connect to someone else's story, right? And so I'm glad that you shared, because I can't do the reflecting, which is one of the tips that I want us to do. And I will talk about this later. But one thing I found along the way, we don't write it down, right? And so the messages that can be so potent and leave an indelible impression upon our hearts, they become very fleeting because the problems become more prominent, right? And so I'm glad that we had this moment. And what I'm going to invite you to do is, before you forget, just write it down. And I'll talk about some prompting questions that could actually help us to recall those moments vividly, even those body sensations, so that when we relive it, we're not reliving the trauma, but we're reliving the promise, right? And that message in the pain. So thank you for sharing, Erica. Thank you so much. And next up, I think I have Gina, then we'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, I was just sort of like her. I was reflecting and of what you were saying. And my husband passed away like in December of 21.
Oh, wait, Gina, hold 1 second for me. I don't know if it's someone else that, I'm sorry for interrupting. But can everyone just mute for me real quick? If you don't mind. Let's see. I don't know. Okay, I apologize for that. You all, if there's any disruption, we'll try to keep going with it. But Gina, go ahead.
And it's like, so that was in December of 21. And that February, was just, we had been together 40 years. And it's just like, that's a big life change, you know. And so I was going through his stuff and hauling boxes and this, that, and the other. And to make a long story short, I got down with my back. And at my lowest point, Denard, I mean, I felt like I was at my lowest point. I was laying in the bed. And even now, and I felt God, but yet I felt alone as far as anybody earthly understanding me, if that makes sense. And, you know, God spoke to me and said, your best days are ahead. And I was like, okay, God, right now, it don't feel like it. But I'm walking by faith and not by sight. And I trust that what you're telling me right now is the truth, because you speak truth over my life. And I mean, I was at rock. When I say rock bottom, that day I felt like I was at rock bottom. And I will never forget that, because through my pain, like you said, in my mess, there's a message to come forth. I knew there was. I knew it all along. And, you know, sometimes we have to go through this to get to the other side. And, you know, to say that God put me with the husband I'm with now, and I know without a shadow of a doubt, God was all in it. He knows it too. And neither one of us saw it coming. And so God is good despite the messes that we feel like we're in. He can make a message out of it.
Okay, I needed to stay on mute for a little bit, Gina, because I had to receive that, and I had to shout it my own way for that, because there's so much of what. First off, wonderful news in the sense of that how you shared the love and happiness that you're experiencing again, and I would say, Gina, and I want to say this to you, and I hear you speak with it. Um, you speak with a strength and a resilience that. Um, it helps me to recognize that you've experienced a lot of difficulties, including losing your husband, and that moment that you talked about your lowest, where you felt God's presence, right? And I think you said what I heard you say. Your best days are ahead. That's what he said to you. And when you said that, and I don't want to get all preachy, but I love. It reminds me of the psalmist David's language in the Hebrew. The short version is he uses two words that shouldn't exist with each other, but it actually is present hope, right? And the best visual I can give you, Gina, when you said your best days are ahead, right? It's like telescopic language. And if you've ever used a telescope, you know that the telescope takes something that's afar that seems unreachable, and it allows you to bring it to where you're standing. And when God is saying that prophetic message to you, your best days are ahead, he's saying it to you in the now, right? So he's saying that you can experience those days now, although you may not experience the fullness of it. But even my words will change your world, right? And we know this because the same words God said in the very beginning, I got to say this, the same words God said in the very beginning, let there be light, are the same words that's holding not just the earth, but the entire universe in places that we have not known existed still together. So God's words are just that powerful. It will bring the future into a present moment where we can actually accept what seems unacceptable, right? But it also gives us that ability to not just move on, but move forward. And I hear you speak with that, Gina, and I'm just so thankful for reminding us of that. That there's a faith that you have in God, but you are also open to hearing his voice. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. And I did see Rachel's hand. So Rachel, I don't want to leave you out. Are you able to speak? Because I know you said that.
Oh, you okay? Sorry. No, you're fine. You're fine.
Go
Hi.
ahead.
So yes, I can share. It's actually sort of apropos timing, but it was sharing a part of my own story, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose like what's going on in this moment, and I want to bear compassionate witness and hold that and hold space for others.
Come on. Okay, no, Rachel, this is and this is your space as well. So just know I want to follow wherever you all are going. And I think that's actually going to land us to our next topic of discussion. So please share.
I guess I'll just start by saying first, thank you all for those who have shared already. Being vulnerable in spaces like this is really hard. And I know I say that often, and this comes from, my spirit animal, Brene Brown, but vulnerability is very much courage to find and fosters connection. And I'm really grateful to be here. And I definitely don't believe in coincidences. I'm more of someone that believes in synchronicity. So as I share my story, I'm actually, sitting in a hospital with my nurse right here, and super grateful for that. But when you talk to Denard about not writing things down, I do write things down. And I think for me, part of that is getting it out of me, and it puts space between me and the problem. And so it's in doing that, I'm able to reshape my own narrative, and shift paradigms. And that's really helpful for me. So in these two poems, which were written a long time ago, it shares a little bit of my story. So the first one says, pain changed me. Life sucking, energy vampire. Opportunities snatched. Life vanishes as I lay in anguish beneath the sheets. Bitter, hurting, and sad. Thank you. Regrets begin to pile up next to the pile of pain pills on my nightstand. Time spent in doctors' offices, in the hospital, undergoing PT, procedures, and surgeries became more frequent than time spent with family and friends. Choice. Full stop. My illness does not define me. I know where my pain ends and I begin. Pain and anger are motivators. Each one, teach one. Education, advocacy, awareness, passion. No one should suffer like I have. 176 million women is 176 million too many. Endometriosis is not the end of me. Fight like a girl. So that was in 2017. And then I've progressed to make change in the Boston area. And this one is written from me, but for all of the individuals that we used to call them endo sisters, so I didn't change the words, but to be, gender inclusive, endo friendos is what I call them now. And so this was for me to all of them. No, said the young doctor with the high and tight. You are just fine. Morphine will suffice. No, said the doctor with the bleached white teeth. You are fine. Just get some sleep. No, said the aunt that rocked you as a babe. You are just fine. Don't misbehave. No, said the neighbor with a hearty sigh. You are just fine. Pick it up. You're behind. No, said the nurse with eyebrows raised. You are just fine. Please, don't complain. No, said your body with a heaving cry. You are not fine. You must know why. You've listened to deniers. You've heard your share of myths. You've dived into the wreck in search of treasure-leaking ships. There you found a camera, a flashlight, and a map. There you lit the world aflame and never circled back. You told your story softly in the loudest of all places. The murmurs grew quite silent. The fire lit your face. Your voice grew stronger with each note, your power rippling through. Your voice thundered with the millions of women just like you. You'll never ever leave us with a no etched in the dark. You said yes with a vengeance, with a mighty loving heart. You are the mightiest of warriors, the loveliest of friends. You are my friendos always. Yes, I believe you without end. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for sharing. I just want to give just a second for that to land with us before we speak on it as a group. And I want to also say, Rachel, I've always valued the bravery, like the bravery in which you share, and also your poems and your journey with endometriosis. It's clear that you've experienced a lot of pain, both physical and emotional, and we've talked about it in different ways. But I love how you've also found the sensory perceptions in which you write with. Place me in that place where you're coping with your pain through writing, but also helping others. Like, so when I hear the theme of your story, your pain has been a catalyst for change, but also the setup of how you use the diagnosis and the subsequent part of your journey to find relief from your pain. And I forgot exactly how you said it, but you were saying that your writing helped to put space between you and your pain, and this is where your pain ends and you begin. That is such a powerful notion to help us understand that our pain is not who we are, right? There is, again, it's messengers, right? And where we lean in and how we lean in determines how we fold, right? So I appreciate you sharing. And here's my question to the group. Here's my question. So, because we're saying that write about these experiences, and I want to be clear, both good and bad, right? And we talked about being vulnerable, right? So essentially, we're saying the more you write, the more you will learn about yourself. That's essentially what we're saying in the story. But what are some challenges you've all faced in trying to write, if you've been writing your story, your journey, your message, and your pain? What are some challenges you faced along the way? And I'll take one or two individuals to share. And again, for those that are just joining, welcome Gigi, Michelle, Lady, and Rosa and Missy. We are here talking about the message and the pain. And I actually heard the first tip is writing. So I'm writing that down, writing your journey. And so if you haven't actually taken on this, and again, I believe in using different ways of writing, whether it's talking to individuals, having them write it down, or you writing it down, whatever you do to engage your thoughts. That's what I'm asking you to do so that you can actually capture your experiences. So the question for the group, and I might start with Rachel, because Rachel, you reflected, I think, since 2017. Let me ask this question to you. If any, what challenges did you face in writing your story? Especially these two poems. Are you able to share, Rachel? Go ahead. There we go. I hear you.
Yeah, sorry, my screen was frozen.
And that goes for everyone. I know we're having experiences with the tech, so I do apologize, but stay the course with me. We're going to work through it as well. So if Rachel comes back, we'll jump right into this. And I'll also ask you, if you want to share a response in the chat, feel free to share in the chat. But let's think about some other tips. What are some other tips that you would give? And let's say if you're going to give advice to others that are struggling with their pain, right? Whether it's writing it down, recalling it, what advice would you give to someone that's actually trying to make sense of what seemingly doesn't make sense, right? So I'll take one or two individuals, or you can share in the chat. Just raise your hand if this is your first time in this space. Raise your hand and I'll take note of it. Okay, Rachel, I see you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, my screen turned white. Sorry, y'all.
You're good.
So I will say the hardest thing for me about writing is, and I will say that writing about chronic pain although challenging, is considerably easier for me to language than child sexual abuse. So for me, the hardest part about writing is that putting it on paper, holding that pen, holding that paper, looking at it as something outside of me makes it real, and I can't deny it anymore. That is the hardest part of writing for me.
Rachel, thank you for sharing. You just actually reminded me of a quote. I might butcher it, but it's by Tanya Marco, and it's actually been recently resurfacing online. And she teaches people in many workshops on writing, but she says, don't write to be liked, don't write to be right, don't write to be understood, but write to be emotionally literate, accepting of yourself, and free. Right. And in the sense, she basically says, I might butcher it. Yeah, right to move a culture, right a psychological change, right to revolutionize your pain, right to revolutionize your pain. And that line stands out to me as you talk, because when we're talking about coping, whether it's finding a healthier way to cope, what I find is that we don't write our stories enough, or we tell our stories and we expect people to remember, right? But all you need is an audience of one. All you need is an audience of one. And so an encouragement I would say for you all is to write, but also that space that you heard Rachel talk about, I would say focus on the moments that stand out to you, right? What are the moments that you remember most vividly? Like in my story, I will never forget watching my wife, with her belly expanding, sitting in the corner of the little couch that we had in the living room. The room felt smaller as I noticed her countenance fall, right? In that moment, it never escapes my mind, because, again, that was a moment where she was hopeless and I was helpless, right? But we still derived the desire to help each other, right? And so focus on the moments that you remember most vividly. I would ask you to do that and use your sensory perceptions when you're writing. And also, what are the moments that made you feel the most important to your story? Like, for example, in that moment, what made me feel the most important is that God took time to send a perfect stranger my way to send a needed message before I knew I needed it, right? And so for me, that meant that not only did I have a message, but I was also on God's heart at that moment, right? And so that's something that, as you write, and also as we're talking about the themes, I would also say look for patterns and themes as you tell your story, right? So if you look at the patterns and themes of my story that I just shared today, it's about transitions, right? Moving from one place to another, but it's also a transition of the heart disposition, right? My heart moved from a place where, hey, it's about trying to keep my family safe, right? Trying to provide for my family. And then this helplessness, hopelessness, and my heart sinks in that moment, but then it's lifted, because then I come to this great realization. And for those that know, I have a Christian worldview, that my family, I was simply called to steward, not provide in the way that I think. Providing was not solely on me. So now all I needed to do is understand 3 words: God will provide. And that changed my life. And he did that through a stranger. He did it through my wife. He did it through individuals like RJ that's here today. He's doing it through individuals like you as well. And I do see a hand, so I want to acknowledge it. Go ahead, lady, and then we're going to actually start wrapping up, because I want to hear more of your stories of how you found or pain shaped you, or what you've learned from your pain. Go ahead, lady.
Yeah, as you were speaking, something came to mind about how you said when you tell your story. Um, sorry, let me turn down this TV real quick. Sorry
You're
about that.
good. Take your time.
Sorry about that. Um,
You're good.
um, you tell your story I guess expecting someone to remember it. Did you say
Yeah,
something like that?
correct.
Um, and it's really, I don't know, something about it kind of struck me because I did go through childhood trauma, and then the first time I spoke out about it to my parents, they argued about it, and then they didn't do anything about it. And then later on, as an adult, I I had to speak out about it because I needed to protect a niece, right? My niece was going to be taken to visit somebody who had abused me. And so I spoke out about it. And then in speaking out about it, my dad said, why didn't you ever tell me any of these things happened? And I'm like, it started making me question my reality. I'm like, like, and in my mind, I felt like I did. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did one time. I did one time, the first time. And then the first time you didn't do anything about it. So then that registered that you weren't the right person to tell. So I never told you any other time it happened, right? And recently I went back because I was trying to reach out to people because my family and my people that I thought were my people weren't helping me with the situation, right? Like, I'm kind of raw and open and exposed, trying to heal from my childhood trauma, and I'm being either I don't know if it's ignored as much as it's like people. Yeah, maybe that. Like, people just want to sweep it under the rug and not look at it and not deal with it, and they just want me to hurry up and deal with my feels and get back to the way I used to be, or whatever it is. But in the post, and I totally overlooked it, but when I went to reread the post the other day, one of my childhood friends wrote that, I remember you telling me about what happened to you, and this girl, I haven't talked to her. She's a woman now. We're both about the same age, since I was 6 years old. And mind you, we're military brats, so we've moved around a lot, and made other friends. She has a whole new life now. She's been married, has children, and she's like, I remember you telling me. And it brought so much comfort to me. Like, I told this little girl when I was a little girl my story, and she remembered. But then I told also my story to my father, looking for support and protection. And when I go back and ask my dad, don't you remember me asking you for help with that situation and telling you what happened? And he can't remember and he can't recall. And I'm like, now I'm wondering, like, what is it that makes somebody remember, and what is it that allows someone to forget? You know what I mean? Because when I messaged that friend again about that comment, and I let her know, hey, it just registered that you said this, and she was like, yeah. I was like, there's, I was like, all it took was a mention of of the situation without detail, and you were able to recall it, right? And she was like, yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I was like, wow. To be honest, I don't even remember telling her, and she remembers. And I was like, wow. One, it was like, okay, now I know I was reaching out, and I know I was telling people who were safe, looking for people to help me. You know what I mean? But yeah, uh, that's all.
Lady, I want to first say that, and I want to, if I can pick up where you left, and I know we're almost at time, but first off, I want to say thank you for sharing, because those are riveting questions, right? And that's a lived experience with a lot of difficulty. Essentially, where you left is where I want to actually pick up. We communicate, and I've said this in other rooms in regards to how we communicate, and And when we communicate assertively or when we communicate out of the space, we actually communicate from a place of safety, right? And when we talk about trauma and when we talk about memory, and I take it from a biblical sense and a practical sense. And I used to teach at a university, and one of the ways that when we looked at these, so the biblical sense, one of the most fleeting things in the aspect of sin is our inability to remember God's love for us, right? The word in the Bible has said like the everlasting love, right? So there's this contention with our desire to completely forget the pains that we cause, right? So that we can either feel better about ourselves or we can suppress, like you used, or dismiss, right? And then sometimes it's a genuine aspect of forgetfulness, right? However, it doesn't change how we feel when that moment happened, right? And so we have to walk through it, journey through it. And then the other part is in the university, what I learned is that people only have the capacity to remember 16 words, word for word, right? So that's when we're looking for plagiarism, we're looking for those things, right? And so people receiving message of trauma receive messages of trauma, especially caregivers, from a place of trauma. It doesn't excuse what they're doing. It doesn't excuse their dismissiveness of it, but people only do what they know how to do, right? And so you ask the proper question, right? Which I don't think I have an answer to. But what I am telling you is simply this, is if we don't ask the question, we can unask it to ask a better question. And here's the question I want to ask you, right? And it's centered around the question that you're asking: what made this person remember and this person forget, right? And then also, what made you share, right? You said it from because you wanted to feel a sense of safety and security. So let me ask you a question. Knowing that you said, and we're wrapping up here, you all, that you are not certain that you remember telling the individual, how did it land in your body when you went back and noticed this person noticing what you shared with them a time back in that moment? How did it land in your body?
It was like it was a huge validation. It was a huge validation because yeah, I felt like the one.
Take your time.
My dad is
This is your space. Take your time.
my hero, you know what I mean? My idol, my person that I looked up to, the one that I modeled my life after, the one that I thought, the one person in the world who would remember and stand up for me. He's like, he was in the military, and he's an airborne ranger, and it's like, this is the man that is willing to die for his country, but also the man who won't stand up for his daughter. And it's like, that is like hard, like the hardest thing for me to accept. And it's been almost worse than the trauma to accept that, he could just forget, and that he can just yeah.
Mm. Mm. And I want to first acknowledge, as you're wrapping up here, I want to acknowledge that I'm sorry to hear that. And how you described is what I want to repeat. That is what I heard your father being someone that would stand up for his country, but not for his own daughter, right? That's hurtful, and I would also submit very confusing, right? But I want to also share, and I want you to take note on your screen as I don't know if you noticed this, lady, but as you were sharing, and even now as I'm talking, there were hearts, right? Did you notice the hearts?
Yes.
Okay. What does that tell you?
That either people can resonate or they sympathize.
Yeah. And that you're not alone, right? And that you're not alone. And while it's not fair for your father to treat you that way, right? I want to be very clear, right? You deserve to be treated with respect, connection, and regardless of, even if there's this mindset of how we serve and who we serve. But I want to say to you that um, if 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 you leave with anything today, because I can't say that that's going to be a comfortable thing to walk through, because there's disappointment, hurt, and dismay that actually stands in that same space, right? Um, but what I want to ask you to do is, in a practical way, is go back to that moment that you talked about being validated, right? Did you already write that situation down? Did you write that moment down?
No.
Okay, okay. You know what I'm going to ask you, right, lady, to do? You know what I'm going to invite you to do?
Maybe write it down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to. And here's why. Here's why. As we wrap up here, I want you to again, in this moment, and I loved how you giggled, and I want you to know how that landed in your body. Essentially, what I'm trying to, the message I'm getting across is that your body keeps count as well, right? And it's stated that in order to overturn one negative message, right, we need five positive messages, right? So you already received one. You received one by noticing it. You received the second one by having the conversation, right? And what I'm going to encourage you to do is now write it down, right? Write it down and revisit it at least once or twice throughout the week, right? It may not change the circumstance, but it will allow you to focus on the moments that actually stand out to you. And that's what we talked about. Remember it vividly. Remember that body sensation, that validation, that warmth that you experienced. Remember how it made you feel, right? And also notice the pattern, right? The pattern here is that you've been able to tell your story, and then there's two sides of it. There's the people that will forget, and then there's the people that you forgot actually you told. But the essential aspect is the message is that you are remembered and someone cares, right? And so I want you to think about that setup as we talk about the conflict of what you just said. The question still remains, like, what makes a person forget and what makes a person remember? But what we do have is an answer here, is that you did share despite all that you went through. And what I want you to do is to allow that sharing to land in your body in a way that validates you and you alone, because you do deserve what you have not received thus far. You do need a space that you are being protected, and your story does matter, right? And so I'm just hoping that if you can consider it just invitational language, you don't have to do it. You can continue to share with others, but I want you to not forget. Because what I'm saying to you, while people, and I'm not saying everyone doesn't remember, what I am saying is that I don't want us to forget the moments that stood out to us, so that we can actually juxtapose them against those bad moments, those unpleasant moments where they're landing in our bodies in a different way, right? Where we can actually learn more about ourselves from those stories. And what I learned from you, lady, and I'm learning from everyone here today, is that you all deserve an opportunity to tell your story. And you did just that, right? And the foundation of that is essential. It says to us in this moment that we have more to share. We just need an opportunity, right? So today, as we wrap up, I wanted to make sure that you all take away that pain is a messenger, right? Pain is a messenger, but how you lean into it matters. Write it down, focus on the moments that stand out, and use your sensory perceptions, all of them, right? What did you smell? What did you taste, right? That was in that space. Look for the patterns, look for the themes, because remember, the themes actually say that the underlying message probably was conveyed in the beginning. Themes stay consistent throughout, right? So you have to identify the message in the beginning, not just where you're currently at or where you want to be. And then lastly, think about the setup, right? Think about the setup of your story. Who are the characters? Where's that conflict? That setup is the foundation of your story. It allows you to manage that story from a perspective of not just someone that something happened to, but someone that can actually narratively change your story. Change your story so you can learn and grow and make a difference in the world and explore all those emotions authentically as you write, even the aspect of the abuse, even the aspect of the joys that we experience. What I want us to do, though, at the end is remember that you're a person that has a story to tell. And if any place, we're going to continue to work on that, it's in this space. So I hope you all come next Sunday as we continue to talk about it, but we're going to get to that midpoint. What do we do with that conflict? And guess what, lady, you brought it. And I'm actually going to build this to for next week. How do I deal with the ones that are forgotten and the ones that have been remembered? And I'm smack dab in the middle. Where do I go with this fork in the road? You all be blessed. Godspeed. And remember, you can't get through what you're going through without you. I want to thank you and thank Circles for being here. Thank you for staying over time. I will see you at the same time, same place, not the same back channel. All right, guys. I love you. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing.